Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well, and today's video I'm basically going to be looking at the new version of Hail Caesar. My rulebook turned up in the post yesterday, so I've spent quite a while going through it and flipping through it and having a look at things. So I thought what we'd do today is actually just do a flip through of the whole rulebook and look at some of the changes that have been made, but really just have a look at how this differs from the old rulebook. Now, as you know, and if you watch your channel, I really like Hail Caesar. I use it for a lot of my games. The old book came out in 2014, and you can see, there we go, there's the two books. And this came out, well, this week, and yeah, I just basically want to have a look at it. So what I thought we would do is go through it, and it'll be quite a long video, and we're going to go through and look over the whole rulebook. This isn't going to be a review of the rules because the rules haven't changed a great deal. There are some little bits that have been tightened up, and there are some small additions in there because it's extended the period that Hail Caesar covers now, because this book sort of covered it up to sort of like the sort of the Normans and the conquest, and then just a bit afterwards, and this now takes it further into the late medieval period. So we'll have a look at some of that. However, this probably will be quite a long video, so what I'm going to try and do is split it into sections as we flip through the book. So if there's a specific section you want to see, then you can just go to that, and of course if you don't want to watch that and you just want to go to the end, then that will be there as well. Now, the only way I really think that a review of this can work is actually as a result of a game. Now, they've already stated that this isn't a brand new sort of version of the rules. Essentially, they've been tightening up and tweaking things from the version 1 book. They've changed the layout. I think there's more examples, and it is a bigger book. However, if you were not a fan of Hail Caesar version 1, or indeed that body of games, Black Powder, Pike and Shot, Hail Caesar, then this probably isn't going to change your mind. The core system is still the same. There's some nice little alternatives that they've put in there to maybe change things a little bit for new players or alternative ways to play, but nothing a great deal. So it's not if you don't like these games and the way these games play with the command, then this isn't going to change your mind. However, if you want to see just sort of like a flip through the book, how everything is laid out, look at some of the new rules that they've introduced, then obviously watch on. So what I'll do is I'll flip this around and we'll get started. Okay, so here we are. Here is the rulebook. Now, before we get started, I just wanted to have a quick look at the free miniature that came with the second edition rulebook. This is their Richard the Lionheart model. So let's have a look. Oh, if I can actually get the thing open. There we go. Okay, so I assume this is the Warlord resin, the Sirecast stuff. So there he is with an axe, and you can either have him helmeted or unhelmeted. I'll probably be able to make use of him in my Crusade armies somehow. So nice little free miniature, which you get with a lot of the Warlord sets. And what was quite nice as well, in with the package, I think I don't know if this is something that they're doing. I did see that someone who picked their copy up in store got this as well. There's a sprue of Republican Romans or auxiliaries. What are these? They're Imperial Roman auxiliaries. So there we go. So just nice to work on. I could probably make use of those as well somewhere down the line. Right. So the first thing I want to talk about is actually the quality of this front cover, and I am so pleased with this. You've got a really nice matte finish, and it almost feels padded, which is quite different from the other books such as Black Powder and Pike and Shot, which has quite a gloss finish. You could have plumped for the edition. I think it was about £70 or £75, and it came with sort of a different cover, and I think it had bookmarks in it and things like that. Now, the reason I didn't go for that one isn't because I didn't want to spend £70 on a book. Trust me, I've spent way more on books before, not just wargaming books, but other books. However, I just simply preferred the artwork of Alexander over the artwork on the other one, which was artwork of Caesar. I just preferred this image, so this is the one that I went for. So When we get into it, I think if you got it on pre-order, I can't remember how many copies it was, but the first few hundred copies, Rick Priestley signed. So the first thing, a really comprehensive contents, and I think I've banged on about this before in other flip throughs and videos, is how much I appreciate a decent indexing or referencing system within a rulebook. There's nothing more irritating than trying to find where a specific rule is explained and not being able to do so. A nice forward by Rick Priestley basically goes through the reasons why they wanted to do a second edition of Hail Caesar, and then we're into what they've called the March of History. So you get a really nice background section at the start of the book. So you get these nice maps that looks at things like the Bronze Age, focusing sort of more on the east, as you would expect, with the Aegean and the Hittite Empire. And then we have an explanation of some of the sort of the areas of conflict that you may want to explore, such as the Hittites. Then we start looking at some examples of the units that you might be able to use. We get into the classical Greece period, and now I really appreciate this kind of thing in rulebooks, especially historical books. In fact, any rulebook for any kind of setting, I like a good lore setting, whether that's at the start or later on in the book. But I really do like a good map, and these are very nice maps. The Peloponnesian War and the rise of Macedon, Greek hoplites. So essentially you're getting each of these eras and then some of the common troops that fought in them. So maybe if you're torn about something that you want to collect or a period you want to represent, you could have a look through this and say, well, actually that piques my interest. Looking at the Hellenistic era, where you have basically sort of Philip and Alexander and the Pyrrhic Wars, and now of course lovely big box of Macedonians. The later Roman Republic at the death of Caesar. So this is really nice. I know this is a very popular period. It's one that I thought of myself. Goes through a bit more of the history of the Marian reforms, the civil wars, the Dark Ages, or what's referred to as the Dark Ages, really covering the era from where the Romans left Britain right up to the Norman conquest. So there's quite a lot that you could do in there. Now, as most of you realise, this is probably the bit that I'm going to be interested in. At the end of that, they've gone to the Wars of the Roses. Now, that does mean they've slightly skipped here, because we've got the Dark Ages ending in 1066, and then we go up to 1455. So there is, you know, that whole early medieval, the sort of high medieval period. This is really nice. This is a really nice map. I've seen similar maps before that show basically the areas of influence that were supporting York and the areas that are supporting Lancaster and where those families are. So this is a really nice map. I'm not quite surprised to actually see that in there in such detail. And then we have sort of an explanation of the seeds of the War of the Roses, how bastard feudalism worked, and just a real, you know, the cliff notes of the situation. So I think that's really good. Some of the lovely miniatures. I think these are the ones from the Perrys. I think I've recognised that board from some of their Facebook pages and their battle reports. Very nice. And then that full lovely piece of artwork that's on the starter boxes. And then we get into the meat of the rules. So starting things off, we have an introduction to the rules and why he created Hail Caesar. Over here we can see the main drive for the game, which is that, of course, this is a game and it's meant to be fun. And as he says here, all questions of victory and defeat pale as nothing before this objective. And that's really true. Sometimes in order to have a good playable game, you do need to sacrifice certain aspects of historical accuracy, especially also if you're on a time limit. And that's something that we have found in our games as well. In here as well, he says about using house rules and adapting the game to your needs. And of course, if you watch my videos, you know that's what I have done. But you know, I really like it that they actually put that in there. That's lovely. A nice explanation of how an army is divided into its divisions and how the general sits. And a nice breakdown of unit types. Now, you can already see how nice the layout is. That isn't to say that the layout in the old one was bad. It was just very of its time, and there's been a lot more effort spent on here. The production value is really high. A good explanation of unit sizes and the fighting qualities, really well set out. And this is something I really like. Now this is a slight change, which is when it comes to unit basing, and this is one of the most common things that I see people talking about or worrying about on Facebook or on videos across things. How to base their armies? What do they have to do? And there isn't really, you can base things however you want. And there's a really good example just here. Now, the old edition of Hail Caesar talked about depth as well as width. Here, they seem to have discarded things about depth and number of models on bases, and really, again, just reiterated, it's really just about the unit frontage. So on the other side, you can see we have a nice table here that shows that, for example, infantry in a warband for a standard unit should be between 150 and 200 mil wide. My units are 180 mil wide because I use 3 bases that are 60 mil wide. Now, they've got away with the depth and the number of models that would be on that base. I think the idea is very simply you should just represent those units as best to show them in their sort of historical context. Here, this example of basing is really nice. This is a very good example and should hopefully answer some of those questions that people have. So that's very nice. There's a little note on existing armies and how to bring those into your current games. And then we get into formations, and this is all very, very similar territory to what came before. So you have battle line, war bands, columns, pike blocks. Now, the pike blocks were mentioned in the first one, but now they've extended the rules to cover that later medieval period. They start to come into things again. We have explanations on open order, testudo and pig's head and wedge formations, and then just a talk about facings and how sort of front and flanks work. Okay, so the main game rules are presented as their own chapter, and then everything is broken down after that. So we have the sequence of play, which is exactly the same as it's been presented before. However, there are some possible alternatives to the way the orders work, which I'll come on to later because it's got its own section. Command is broken down into a really nice, well set out chapter about what happens if you want to pass a test and if what those effects are, how divisional orders work, and how distance can affect that. Blunders, we all know they happen in games, so they've got their own section and the table here. There's also reference at the back of the book. As you can see, we've got more artwork in here. I think this is the Perry's as well. Distances for moving units have remained the same, 6, 9 and 12 inches. Proximity is explained well. And now we also have man-handling artillery. As you'll see with the later medieval period, cannons are now a thing. So they're saying that the lightest types of man-portable machines can move at 6 inches per move. A machine of this kind can move once in the command part of the turn and still shoot. If it moves more than that, it can't shoot, which is essentially what we've been doing anyway. Although I think we might have said if it moves, it can't shoot, full stop. I'll have to double check. Okay, and as you can see, we have the rules for units leaving the table, and I should have mentioned, I think there's been a slight change in orders to off-table units, unless I've probably just been playing it a different way or wrong, which is there is no modifier to the order roll for rolling for units that are coming on. You simply measure the distance from the commander to the point of entry, so if they're 24 inches away, or they'll suffer a -2, and if they're off the table, then they're considered to be within 12 inches of the entire unit. Now we're into the ranged attacks, which is great for me because obviously a lot of what I do in the later medieval period involves the longbow, and there's also some changes to add to that later on. Everything is well laid out with good examples in here about nominating targets and the choice of targets. I really quite like the art style of these examples. They've carried on this sort of sketched sort of diagrams rather than sort of these blocks that look like they were done in Word. So those are really nice. Well set out modifiers, so what the unit size modifiers are, the formations are, and also the to hit modifiers as well. Something that's interesting here, you did suffer a -1 before if you were firing at formed heavy infantry to the front. However, you can see that's been extended, so if the target is formed, shielded, heavy infantry being attacked by an enemy to their front quarter, or formed cataphract cavalry, regardless of the direction of attack, you suffer a -1. As you can see here, we've got the table which talks about morale save modifiers, which they've now extended to include artillery. Here they talk about casualties and shaken units, how units become shattered if they've accumulated casualties that are a total of double their stamina value. That's always been in the rules. It's just, as I say, it's all just been tightened up and reworded. Here we have a whole section on artillery, which of course has been added in about how to shoot overhead with artillery, and essentially what to do in those cases, which is they have, a friendly unit has to be further than 6 inches away, as you can see here in this example. This unit can fire because these guys are over 6 inches away, and I believe that they suffer no modifier by the looks of it. We've always applied a -1, but here it is. If it can go over the top, it just goes over the top. Here we're into the hand-to-hand combat section, and of course this is probably one of the most important sections for the entire rulebook, and that's simply because most combats are going to be resolved through hand-to-hand combat rather than shooting. Now, the combat system in Hail Caesar is slightly different to those of Black Powder and Pike and Shot. The way that the break tests are affected is different, and of course you're more likely to end up with multiple combats. And there's a really good example here of how to sort of pair off the combats, and how sort of multiple combats would work, or even if you have one unit basically facing off against 5. And the way that I understand it is essentially if the center of a unit is touching an enemy unit, then it can fight. So in the example here, you can see they have a large unit here, or a larger unit, and then these 3 small units can all fight because their commander or the unit center is touching all of them, whereas these 2 on the sides would just be supporting. A nice explanation of who can't charge, and then about making the charge move, and then of course we're going to get into the charging reactions. But before that, we can see he's actually come up with more examples, so how you charge sort of 2 on 1, or how you charge 1 on 2. I like it that they've expanded that a little bit, and again, more examples to cover situations that you may come across. The charge responses are still here, so stand, closing shots, evade, counter charge, turn to face, and the Parthian shot. I don't think a great deal has changed in there. I say I have read through this, and it all seemed familiar and not to really be any different from before. Attacking, here you can see again we've got a nicely laid out table which shows what the size modifiers are, the formation modifiers, and then the situational modifiers such as you're charging, you're winning if you run one of the last round of combat, or if you're shaken and disordered. Getting into morale saves and supports. Lots of examples, which is really, really nice. And then we look at the break tests. Okay, so now we're into break tests. Now what you can see here is before they had essentially one table which dealt with ranged on one side and melee on the other. They've now split it into 2 tables. So we've got our ranged attack break test table, which shows you how each of the different types of troop type, infantry, cavalry or skirmishers, will respond. And then you have the same over here as well. There's increased explanation about how to retreat, which is all very, very nice. Good explanations on what victorious units do. Now, for some reason, in the previous book, I always found this harder than what the unit was doing that was retreating, just because probably it doesn't happen to me, the victorious unit, very often, but it's well laid out and, again, easy to follow. Disorder gets its whole section here, tells you what causes disorder, all set out, what the penalties are from it, and then how to recover from it. That's good. Now, before, I believe disorder was actually shoved into the shooting section. I could be wrong, I could just look in the book over here. Okay, so yes, so disorder was dealt with quite close to the start in the shooting section, and then it just gets dealt with in various other sections throughout the book. It didn't have its own area. I know there was a bit in the break test section and morale, just sort of summarising things, but here disorder has essentially its own chapter. It's not a long chapter, but that's good. All your information in one place. Now, this is where things start to change a bit, and we can see some more additions when we get into commanders. Now, the idea about the models and the reserve commanders is the same, and the general's reroll, which is that your general essentially can give a reroll to another commander within 12 inches. But now there's some special orders that the general can issue, such as follow me. Now, he can join a unit essentially within 12 inches, and he just goes for an order test. If he passes it, then he joins the unit, and that unit basically goes 3 orders forward, or 3 moves forward. So imagine Alexander joining his cavalry and then charging the Persians, or something similar to that. We have the rally order, which was there before. The general advance is really nice. Now, this is an order that can be issued by the general and can be the first and only order given by any commander that turn. And essentially, he rides out in front of the army and encourages the entire army to move regardless of distance. So he rolls 1 order test, and if it's successful, then the entire army just goes 1 move forward. Not multiple moves, just one move forward. So you could just bring the whole line forward, which I think is actually quite nice. It does mean that you're potentially speeding up play quite a bit as well. This rule here, where is your courage? This is a nice one, but not one that because I don't play with broken divisions generally in my games because my games are too small. So when a division breaks and it's essentially retreating off the table, the general can do a where is your courage order, and if he essentially rallies that unit then joins his division. So it would be possible for the general to, over multiple turns, I guess, rally multiple units into his side. But I guess that's also almost all he would be doing, is trying to rally them. So it depends how many turns you play. I generally play 6. But if there's a hard-hitting unit that's running off the table and he can rally them and get them into his division, that would be really nice. There's a nice summary here of basically how the commanders act on the battlefield. So if you've got any questions, just go through here. So for example, they have a move of 24, regardless of whether they're foot or mounted. Now, I think, as in Black Powder in the last one, if just depending on how you modelled them, they had a difference in movement. But there we go. That's quite a lot, actually, 24. But I don't know if that's just assuming that you're playing on a much larger table. I'd potentially drop that down a little bit for my gaming purposes. But, you know, if you play it as is, then no worries. The whole idea of risk to commanders from shooting and in hand-to-hand combat is essentially the same as well, and what happens to them when they are wounded. There's an alternative way, little box up here, of fielding generals, which is as just separate generals, and essentially they can only give orders to troops by moving into touch with another commander and taking over that division. He would also then be able to ride around and give his reroll a little bit more freely if he's not got his own men to command. A nice section on victory and defeat, dealing with the broken divisions, retiring, how to abandon different elements such as baggage and medium and heavy artillery, and also just about setting up your own victory conditions, which is of course what I do in most of my games. Now, this section was in the previous book, and we go through troop types. Now, this is how you'll build up your forces. Obviously, there are expansions for Hail Caesar. There are supplement books, which you can use. But sometimes in those books, they might not deal with something, or maybe not deal with a troop type that you want. So this will let you pick that unit, give you some baseline stats to work off, and then change it. So as you can see, the core troops here, we have a heavy infantry, medium, and light infantry. And it also just gives you their statistics and just a little explanation about them. Skirmishers, cataphract cavalry, I might need that for my Byzantines, heavy cavalry and medium and light cavalry, and horse archers. So plenty on there. Now, interestingly in here, there are actually some little reminders and some rules. So if we look at the light cavalry, it just points out here they are highly mobile troops, and when in open order, they can move at the fastest rate of all cavalry, 12 inches. In open order, they occur no distance modifier when given orders. So if you play Black Powder, that's essentially while in open order, they have the marauder rule. And then when they come into close order to charge, they will lose that and they will go slightly slower. Chariots, I don't play anything with chariots, but there's your rules for those. But what is quite cool, we have wagons and baggage, and I do have wagons for my late medieval stuff. In here, there's suggested values for them. It does say that they have some capacity for putting up a fight, but will quickly despair at a prolonged combat. So that's quite cool. So if you are using them in a scenario to try and get them off the board or something, you've got some statistics there. Of course, those of you that like an elephant, they've got you covered. And then over here we have the basic artillery, so we're looking at the sort of tension artillery, torsion stuff, so ballistas, light artillery, catapults or onagers, and then the heavy catapults here. Now, the bit that I know everyone is interested in is coming up. That has its own section, which is about things like cannons. Now, they've added some other common troop types, which is nice. So we have about light infantry archers, just single sort of units of those, and medium infantry archers, medium infantry spear and bow. So they have added in a little bit more. Skirmishers with long range weapons and medium infantry warbands. Specifically British chariots and Persian scythe chariots. And then there's a little table here which basically shows you how you can modify the basic types by making them large, standard, small or tiny. So there's no adjustment to the stats particularly that I can see there. Like for example, they haven't changed medium infantry. 663 5+6 is the line that they had before, but really nicely laid out and easy to reference. The section on special rules should be familiar to everyone who's played Hail Caesar, Black Powder or Pike and Shot, and these are just the rules that you can assign to a unit just to give it a little bit more flavour. So we have things like Elephants, Elite, which lets you recover disorder. Now, Disorder Elite seems to have been basically changed a little bit here. Now, Elite used to have 4+, 5+, 6+, so you'd have different values of Elite. Now it just appears that you've just got one value, so it's just 4+. I could be wrong if that is a change, however, or I've been playing it wrong for about 9 years. However, in this one, if you're Elite, you recover Disorder on 4+. Things like Frenzied Charge and Freshly Raised are the same as before. Marauders is a rule here, so that is actually in here, which is you ignore the distant penalty on orders. Marksman, the same as before, reroll 1 missed shot. Now we have pikes in here. Now I know quite a few people actually who'll be incredibly happy about this, but they've basically summarised here. It has to use the pike block formation. Pikes can only make a single move outside their front quarter. The main one here, chargers lose their charge bonus when charging them. So not just cavalry, if you're any type of unit and you are charging them, you will lose that charge bonus, which could be critical. Other rules, such as the testudo formation, which everyone I'm sure will be familiar with, are all explained in really good detail. Tough Fighters, which is another one that I use, which is reroll 1 missed. Tough Fighters reroll 1 missed combat attack. Essentially the close combat version of Marksman. And then at the end of the section you have it all nicely summarised as well. Terrain has its own section as before. There's not really a lot more to say about this other than it just looks really nice. They've expanded the sections just a little bit. They still operate in the same way from what I can tell. Okay, so as you can see, things like linear obstacles, it looks like the same before. Essentially you just clamber across them using your base orders. And then there's rules on buildings. Now this is the bit that I think people are going to find quite interesting. This is the rules for one-on-one games. The rules assume that you're going to play in big multiplayer games. I sometimes do play multiplayer games. This is just some suggestions that you could do if you are just playing one-on-one or you don't have an umpire. Or if you're playing on, for example, a 6x4 or just an 8x4 table. There's a suggestion of reducing the unit frontages by almost sort of one step if you're using the basing elements that are in the book. So a large unit would be, for example, 40mm bases wide, so 160. A standard unit would be 120, and a small unit would go down to 80. So just ways of adjusting things to make them a little bit more balanced if that's what you want. Of course, they suggest reducing measurement. Now, this is the thing that I really found interesting, was this idea of alternate orders. So when using this option, there is no requirement to state the order before attempting to move. So the way the Hail Caesar, Black Powder and Pike and Shot work is you state the intention of the unit before you do it. So for example, I would say I want Henry Neville to rush to the top of the hill, cross the hedge and advance as far as possible into the field on the other side. And then I would roll the dice and you would do that. Now, this is assuming that you are sort of like, you're working, as I say, one-on-one. And in this one, you basically don't announce the order before you roll. Essentially, you roll. If you pass the order test, you then get to execute one action. So that would be a move. And then if you fail the order, the normal thing happens whereby the commander can't make any more. However, after you've made that additional order, you can carry on ordering that unit. So you could roll and he could go again, and you could roll and he could go again, up to a maximum 3 times. Once you finish with that unit, or you decide you finish with him, you'd move on. You can't come back to him. So you can't do 2 orders with one, go and order another unit, and then come back to that one. You'd just have to deal with him then and there. So that's quite interesting, and I think that's a way of maybe sort of introducing players to it who maybe that idea of all or nothing doesn't really appeal to them, or even just if they're uncomfortable sort of announcing the orders in that sort of rather sort of flamboyant or bombastic way. So that is really interesting. Interestingly as well, it says that the only time you can blunder is on that first test, so you can't blunder in the ones after it. So if you rolled a double 6 on the second order, that wouldn't be a blunder. So that's interesting. I don't know if I'll be doing that, but maybe it'd be worth giving it a go. Then we have the other way that these orders, so the way the free order, follow me in general advance, how that interacts. Rules on setting up a game, how the table works and deployment. And then what I really enjoyed and what I really liked about this is they had 3 scenarios in here. So 3 basic scenarios: an encounter battle, so how to set up; an approach battle, so where someone's already deployed and someone comes onto the table, and then a meeting engagement where you both start off the table and come onto it. So if you're not if you don't like thinking up scenarios or you're struggling to find one, there's free there just to get you going. Nice artwork on here as well, which there has been. There's the Richard the Lionheart model all painted up. So here we have the army lists. Now this section wasn't really in the other one, but this is for people who maybe want, not restrictions, but they want balances, so that they could say to someone, right, let's have a game, it's this many points. So as you can see here, your 50% of your army has to be infantry, 25% has to be legions of infantry, so a non-quartered and non-skirmish infantry must be legionnaires. Oh, okay, this is for Romans. I missed that bit. Oh, that's the example there for Romans. So if we have a look over on the other table, we can see that here we have, this is for Gauls. So this is the 4th to 1st century, so it just gives you an idea here. So here we have the Gaulish units, so 28 points for a medium infantry warband. Extra field warbands as large units add 7 points. So it is what you've probably imagined and seen in other games. So we have the Gauls there, and then we have a Marian Roman army. That's nice, so if you're doing that. And then there's a whole little section on points value calculation. So these are just examples. So they haven't gone through and done army lists for every single period. I imagine that there's going to be supplements coming out, and that will run those down in those. But here you can see where the different troop types are essentially just sort of added up here. Shows you what the points are as standard, and then if you make them small or large, and then if they've got weapons, how those interact with the points, adding points or taking ones off of them. An idea is just of how to apply the special rules, which is quite nice. Now we're into the section that obviously I was incredibly interested in, and I know a lot of other people are, and that is the late medieval battles. Now here we have a little bit of information about how sort of infantry tactics changed, how sort of just the scope of battle changed as well. And here we are. So we have the rules on close fighting, and sort of like how the fact that an infantry morale base is more sort of 4+ regardless of armor, when you're talking about sort of the close fighting. So for all close fighting infantry whose primary role is hand-to-hand combat, they've made them 4+. It doesn't mean all close combat fighting troops have to have a morale of 4+, but rather that's the base value. So that's just reminding me something that I meant to say, which I picked up on earlier on as we were going through the book, and then I forgot to actually say anything, is the section on closing ranks down here now applies to anyone who has a shield. I think before it was heavy infantry and a shield, now it's anyone with a shield can choose to close ranks after the round of combat where it was initiated, so if you charged or you received it. And if you close ranks, you get a +1 bonus save to your morale and a -1 to hit penalty. So that's quite good. So if you've got some shield arm infantry and you really want to hold people up, you can close ranks. You'll be getting 3+ save as base if you're fighting in the later medieval period, and but you'll be -1 to hit, so you'll be hitting on 5s. However, if you're winning the combat, you'll be getting +1 anyway, so you go back down to 4s. Here as well, we talk about the household formation. Now, he makes a good point that how medieval battle formations isn't sort of widely known. There are ideas, there's a lot of supposition, and there's a lot of argument as well. What they've decided to do is view that a typical English tactical infantry formation is called a household, and that is a mix of men-at-arms, billmen, and bowmen, and that would represent all of the men that a lord has brought along. If you look at muster lists, they brought, for example, 80 bowmen, 12 billmen, and like 2 men-at-arms, and then all of these would get drilled in. So that unit there is a mixed infantry, so that's a mix of medium infantry, light infantry, I guess, and heavy infantry. So it almost has the stat line of a heavy infantry unit with the ability to shoot. If you've been watching our games, I reduced the mixed units to bill and bow because I remove the men-at-arms from them, but it definitely gives you some interesting possibilities. Medieval pike block formations, very nice. And then we get into things like the arbalists, so whereas crossbows became increasingly powerful from the 13th century, but at the same time armour became more effective, so the same rules of arbalists are applied for crossbows. 18-inch range, their morale save is capped at 5 and no closing fire or traversing shots. That's what we used, I think, anyway. Maybe we did do closing fire, I can't remember. Now, the great thing is the Aquabus, the handgun, range of 18 inches, target's morale is capped at 6, no closing or traversing shots as well. So that is very, very cool. Rules for cannons in here. Now these are similar to Hail Caesar, to Black Powder. Medium infantry have a range of 36. Extreme range is anything over half range. So you get 2 shots at half range and 1 shot at over half range. Morale saves are capped at 6 if they're under half, and then 5 if it's over half. Carriage mounted guns can be manhandled a single move at a time. So rather than all shots beyond 12 inches being considered extreme range, in the cases of cannons, all shots are over half range are extreme range and suffer a -1 to hit penalty. So that's really interesting. I can't see in here any rules about them blowing up, so we will be keeping that though, definitely, because can't have cannons not blowing up. Handguns on here, essentially the same as crossbows. However, if you take casualties, you have to take a break test. I think that's the same. Is that the same over here? It must be the same for a cannon, surely. Longbows have their own section now. That's very nice. They've given the longbows a extra 2-inch range on top of the normal bows. So for everything else, they're just considered to be bows. It's just you get a nice little additional 2 inches. Rules on medieval pike, we covered that slightly earlier on, but that's just re-emphasised there. Purvey shield, so if you deploy a purvey shield, so for example those cool crossbows that the Perrys make, if their unit is equipped with purveys, it counts as behind cover to its front if it remains stationary in its own turn. That's really cool, so there'll be modifiers to hit it and bonuses to save. Ideas such as stakes and chains and pits and static defences, you get those in the Perry English Archer set for Agincourt. You get those cool stakes and you have chains on them, so they've got you covered there. Cavalry charging have to test for disorder as they're going through, if they cavalry obliged to retire are automatically disordered as they go back through them, so that's cool. Now here it is. Here is the Wars of the Roses mid 15th century army list. So I imagine this is how a lot of the army lists are going to be presented. Obviously we had the 2 examples earlier on. Now here is this one. Now I've already looked at this, as you can imagine. This was the first thing I came and looked at, and my first comment on it is it's essentially the list that was produced on the Perry's Facebook page for their Wars of the Roses campaign, but it's been tightened up a little bit. There's been a couple of rules added and a few more troop types. So over here you've got the same disbursement of cavalry, knights, household. So you can see up to a quarter of the army can be cavalry. Knights can be up to 50% of that 25% of the cavalry. 50% of the army has to be households, which we discussed earlier on, and divisions must contain at least 4 units. But as we go down here, you can see household of mixed infantry, bill and longbow, a household of mixed infantry, halberd and handguns. So you've got different ideas in here. So you mix in some crossbows, have halberds and handguns. So if you want to have those continental troops, they've really got you covered. If you just want some halberd armed infantry, those are there as well. Then we just get into obviously crossbows, medium infantry crossbows as a small unit, longbowmen, light infantry longbowmen. Do we have mounted longbowmen? No, we don't. However, I don't see any reason why you couldn't just chuck them on. Obviously they can't fire the longbows, but they could go up there and then get off. Special rules on here as before. Now interestingly, I think knights men at arms can only be fielded as a small unit. They don't have standard units of men. I mean, there's nothing again, as the rule said earlier on. Do what you want, but here you can only put men at arms down as a small unit. Yet you can deploy mounted knights as a large unit. Well, not large, but as a standard unit. Mind you, they are very brutal in combat. Down here you can see cannons, light cannon, the Rebuilder Quinn, which is one of. Have I just gone over the rules? Have I missed the rules for a Rebuilder Quinn? Is that in there? Did I miss that? Handguns. I thought I missed a rule. I'm sure I saw them. Here we are. One type of mobile light gun was a Rebuilder Quinn. A multi-barrel cannon. This weapon can move as described. Has a maximum range of 18, but instead of shooting with 2 shots up to half range, it shoots with 3 shots. Half range in this case is only 9 inches, but at close distances it is very lethal. So that's cool. So if you want to get your multi-shots in. Sorry, I thought I did just miss that over. Now here you just have commanders. 1 commander must be provided per division, and they have a leadership rating of 8, and they are free for your army. They don't come off your points cost. And that's it. So that is the Wars of the Roses list. It's essentially the same one that was published before. Really, really nicely set out. Really nice artwork. What we're going to do, we will do a battle just using this with none of the adaptations that I've made for that. Now obviously if you're watching this video you might know nothing about that, so I'm not going to go on about it now. But there you are. Those of you people who want to try Wars of the Roses army list and people decide, they've got you covered. It's got its own nice little section. Now we have rules on sieges, how to set up a game, how units operate within fortifications, and also how cavalry will operate in fortifications as well. Rules for moving onto and off of walls. So basically, it's just assumed that everything is impassable. However, troops positioned on ramparts or within towers can always move down to the enclosed space behind them. So even if you haven't got a ladder up against the wall in that sort of area, it's just assumed there are ladders or there's ropes, or maybe they jump onto a little building that's there and they roll off of it, and I don't know. So they can always come down with an order. There's rules for what happens once a breach is formed, engagements over the ramparts, and also then how to use siege towers. Now if you're watching my videos, you know I want to do sieges in the Crusades, and I've got my eyes on the siege tower, so that's something I'm really interested in looking into. Now this is quite cool. If you're setting up for a siege, there's actually rules for conducting a bombardment to try and create a breach. So you have to put your artillery or whatever it is you're using as a static attack. So a bombard or maybe a trebuchet or something like that. And you basically target a weak point of the wall, and to cause a breach, the score of the dice plus the number of hits inflicted must total more than 6. So for example, a single hit will breach on a score of 6, 3 hits will do so on a roll of 4 or more. So there's a nice little way of working it out. Once a breach has been made, it becomes defensible with a +1 or +2 cover save. So if you do want to run a siege, I hope you've got a piece of terrain that you can put on there to show that a breach has been caused. Rules for undermining here as well. Now at the back of the book, similar to the first one, we have a rules summary where essentially you have a bullet point step by step how to go through each of the main sections. So the main sequence of play, how to issue a division order. This is a really nice reference section and a lot easier to read than the first book. I think that's my main takeaway from this. I know that sounds a little bit silly because there are lots of really nice little additions in here. Well, I say lots of additions, but just little ones that look good. But the book is a lot easier to digest and to find what you need. So if you wanted to know, okay, how the blunders work, rather than going to that section, which you can do, you could just nip through the back here. Everything about working out hand-to-hand combat with the break tests, that's all here. Disorder. So everything is summarised very succinctly and very nicely. The same nice art throughout. And then we get to the quick references at the back. You've got both your break tests from range attack here and your break tests from hand-to-hand combat here. Unit size modifiers from ranges. So actually, sorry, I just read the whole quick reference here is range and the whole quick reference here is hand-to-hand. And at the back of the book, we have a really nice set of rosters if you want to photocopy those and use them. So that is really nice. And then we're just on to the back here. Now, the rule book is 236 pages long. As I say, it's a really nice production. So my thoughts summing up. Now, bear in mind, I haven't played a game with this yet, so there might be things that I've missed from version 1 that will only come out as we play a game. I've done my best to go through, but when you're trying to pick out individual rules to see, is this going to work, is it not, you sometimes miss them, whereas it might be actually when we're playing a game, there might just be some wording that's changed that means that things play slightly differently. So really looking forward to having a game of this. Now, there is one thing in here that was in the first edition book that isn't in this one. In the first edition book, they had a whole section which was essentially examples for play, and it gave you statistics. So they had the chariot era here, so like you had at the start of the book, here's the explanation of a chariot area, and then they have an example battle with basically statistics for example, Egyptian spearmen and what they used. That isn't in this book here, so I'm hoping there'll be some supplements coming out soon. Obviously, the supplements that are already out can be used. There's no reason you can't use this book. But if you can say yes, these troops are heavy infantry or these are light infantry, then obviously you can just use the stats here. So there was one for the classical age, the Romans, and the one that we've been using for our Crusades, which is obviously the Crusader part of it, which obviously I can't find. Here we go, the Road to Damascus battle. Of course there was a bookmark I didn't use. The Crusaders and the Damascus statistics were here. So there isn't a section like that. Do I think you're missing anything? Not really. All they did in those battle reports was it just used the basic statistics that were already presented in the book, and these are presented well, and they give you lots of examples of what those troop types might be. So summing up on this after this flip through, and thank you for sticking with it if you have, I am very impressed. Out of all of the Warlord books that have come out recently, such as I say recently, but Black Powder 2, the Epic book, the supplements, this I would say has got the highest production value. It's really nice. I just really like that cover. I keep on touching it and stroking it, which is slightly odd. Inside, everything looks really well laid out. It looks like a lot of work has gone into this. I can't comment on proofreading or anything yet because I had as I say, I only got this yesterday, and I went through it, but so far I can't see any major issues. I know in, like, for example, in Black Powder 2 there are a couple of tables that were duplicated in places that they shouldn't have been. However, this does look really nice. I really enjoy the artwork. There seems to me to be a lot more use of examples in here than in other books, which I always think is good. Obviously the addition of the sort of the later medieval period is very nice as well, and I'm looking forward to seeing now what they do. What's the first supplement going to be? I've heard there may possibly be a supplement for the Wars of the Roses, which of course I'd be really interested in, whether that's just the Wars of the Roses or the late medieval period as a whole, taking in 100 Years' War, Wars of the Roses, and maybe having a look at some of the Burgundian Wars or the early Italian Wars. Who knows? Although you're getting into slightly, well, you are in pike and shot in that period, so that's already covered. Overall, I'm really pleased. We're going to do a battle report just using the vanilla rules that are in here without tinkering with anything, which is hard for me. I don't, you know, if you watch my videos, you know I like to tinker with things, especially when it comes to rules, but we will do a battle report for this. So I guess the question will be whether or not we do it for the First Crusade or whether we do it for the Wars of the Roses. I'm thinking the Wars of the Roses because we've already got loads of those battle reports up, and we could see how it actually differs. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching this. This was just a sort of in-depth flip through of Hail Caesar version 2, or the second edition rather. Anyway, guys, if you've got any questions, pop them down below and I'll do my best to answer them. I hope you are all keeping well, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye bye.